1954, the French surrendered to the Viet Minh, and independence was temporarily given to Vietnam. Vietnam was divided at the 17th parallel, and civilians were allowed to move freely between the two states for 300 days. Most supporters of the Viet Minh moved to the north, and anyone opposing communism fled to the south. Eisenhower felt he had to fill the void left by the French in order to prevent Ho Chi Minh from unifying Vietnam under communist rule. So, starting in 1955, the U.S. started sending military advisors to assist the South Vietnamese army. However, as the conflict quickly escalated, the amount of military advisors increased, and in 1965 we sent combat troops. The Vietnam War continued for another 10 years and at its peak had over 500,000 American soldiers stationed there. The war ended when the North Vietnamese captured Saigon and the South Vietnamese government fell. By this time, the vast majority of Americans were against it. However, some people, like my interviewee, were against it from the start. I interviewed Lenny Rose, who, at the start of the Vietnam War, had just graduated from high school and was attending law school. He describes the effect the Vietnam War had on his life and his opinions of it as a politically active civilian.
Well, at the beginning, the person I was running Robert Kennedy's campaign in upstate New York when he was running for senator in 1964, and he was against the Vietnam War. And that year I was 18 or 19, so I was against it from the beginning. Well, I wasn't rooting for anybody to lose. I just didn't like all the soldiers getting killed for no reason in a civil war. There's a group back then called Students for a Democratic Society, SDS for short, and Mark Rudd was the champion in Columbia, and I was good friends with him. I was up at the University of Rochester, so we just did a lot of organizing together in terms of just getting people out to protest, and he was more radical than I was back then because he would have sit-ins at the college and try and block professors from getting to their classes. I wasn't involved with that kind of stuff. Over the 5-year period from 64 to 69, we had 2 marches on Washington, and one I got gassed in. That was in 69, and then we went back again after the Kent State killings in 1970 because the war didn't stop till 75. So we fought the war pretty much, the whole time. Watching the students at Kent State get killed by the National Guard. Well, I wasn't there, but in 1970, I think it was 1970, the National Guard came out to break up a protest at Kent State University in Ohio. And they were supposed to have rubber bullets, but they didn't. They had live ammunition, and they just opened up on the students.
On Monday, May 4th, 1970, the Ohio National Guard occupied Kent State University in Kent, Ohio, in order to control the anti-war demonstrations. They fired 67 rounds into a crowd of about 1,500 people who had gathered either to protest or were just spectating the protest. 4 people were killed and 9 others were wounded, one of which is now permanently paralyzed. To this day, there hasn't been one arrest and no one was ever punished for the killings.
Initially, I went to Toronto with a bunch of other, left-wing radicals, as it were. And I was there for 8 months. And then my congressman, who was against the war also, he got me an offer for a teaching position in Harlem in New York. And if I would take that position, they would give me a deferment. So that's how I got out of the war, but we never stopped protesting the war.
During the Vietnam War, tens of thousands of people fled to Canada in order to escape the draft. In 1971 and 1972, Canada had more immigrants from the United States than any other country in the world. Although the presence of draft evaders in Canada was controversial, none of them faced any consequences because draft evasion was not a criminal offense in Canada. Many other methods were used to avoid the draft, including enlisting in the Coast Guard, faking physical and psychological issues, and even faking homosexuality. There it is.
One of the most amazing night of all was in 19, let's see, what year was it? It was either 67 or early 68, maybe January of 68. One of the four-star generals was on national TV, and they put everybody's birthday into a hat. And they shook up the hat and they started picking out birthdays. And number one was whatever, I forgot, who remembers I remember what my number was. But number one was a particular birth date, and that would be the first person to get drafted. The first birth date, all those kids would get drafted first. Then number two, number three. So the good news was that they picked, my birthday had the same number as my favorite baseball player. But the bad news is he was number 7. So I was number 7 in the draft. But that just didn't, that just knew that I would leave the country. There's no way that, that's the first time I knew I wouldn't finish law school until I went back later on. And I went back. I went back 8 years later and finished. Well, you had to understand the theory. The Republicans who, with Nixon, who were proceeding with the war, they believed in the domino effect, saying if Vietnam fell, the rest of the world would go communist. But those of us who were against that theory knew that it was a civil war because the French had been fighting there since the early 50s. And the French gave up in 1954. I don't know why we ever decided to go in there, to set up a puppet government like we do. It's not the only time we've done this. We've done this many times. We killed Salvador Allende in Chile. We killed Patrice Lumumba in the Congo. Our government has a history of killing leaders we don't like and setting up puppet governments. Hopefully we've gotten a little bit better.